Sabrina looked at her parents' faces and sighed. Her father had a round, warm face like her sister's, framed with blonde hair. Her mother, Veronica, was beautiful, with high cheekbones and jet black locks. They looked vulnerable, lying there surrounded by darkness. "I won't let another Christmas go by without you. I'll find a way to bring you home," Sabrina said as she reached out to touch them. Her hand dipped into the magic mirror's reflective surface, and her parents' image rippled the way a pond does when a stone is thrown into it. Sabrina stared at them until they faded away. "Same time tomorrow night," Mirror said as his face reappeared. "See you then," Sabrina said, wiping the tears from her cheeks and flashing Mirror a hopeful smile. The little man nodded and his face faded away. The girl tiptoed back down the hallway, but just as she reached her bedroom, she heard a painful groan coming from the room opposite. Mr. Cass was having another difficult night. Sabrina stood in the hallway, listening to his painful breathing. She imagined that at any moment the door might explode, and the big bad wolf would catch her up in his jaws. What would they do if the wolf beat Mr. Cass and got loose? What if the old man wasn't strong enough to keep him inside? But Mr. Cass wasn't the only ever-after she had doubts about lately. The charm of living in a community where fairy godmothers and cowardly lions were her neighbors had worn off, and Sabrina was beginning to view the ever-afters with suspicion. After all, one of them was responsible for kidnapping her parents. She had decided to keep an eye on them all until her parents were home, Mr. Cass included. "Go to bed, child," a voice growled. "Or are you going to huff and puff and blow the door in?" The voice startled Sabrina. It sounded like a combination of Candace and the wolf, and she quickly darted into her bedroom and closed the door tightly. Leaning against it, she realized how dumb she had been. Of course he could smell her through his bedroom door. Chapter 2. There were 3 things that Sabrina took great pride in. 1. She had successfully arm-wrestled every boy at the orphanage, including 2 extremely humiliated janitors. 2. She wasn't afraid of heights. And 3. She wasn't a sissy. When one wakes up to find a giant hairy spider crawling on one's face, one should be allowed to throw a hissy fit, which was exactly what Sabrina did. And her blood-curdling scream caused Daphne to wake up, see the spider, and scream too. Daphne's scream just made that whole thing that much more horrible for Sabrina, so she screamed even louder, which caused the little girl to scream and her sister scream, resulting in a mini concert of hysteria that went on and on for about 5 minutes. Granny Rhoda burst into the bedroom with Elvis at her side. Granny's grey hair, still streaked with its former red, was rolled up in huge collars and tucked underneath a sleeping cap. She wore a bright blue nightgown patterned with little cows jumping over the little moons, and her face was covered in a mossy green mud mask that she swore kept her looking young. But her mud mask was not nearly as startling as the deadly sharp broadsword she held in her hand and the fierce battle cry that bellowed from her throat. Scanning the room for attackers, the old woman said, "My goodness, Lieblings, what's the matter?" "There!" Sabrina and Daphne shouted in unison, pointing at a black tarantula the size of a baked potato that had leaped off the bed and now clung to a nearby curtain. Its 8 long, hairy legs and vicious-looking pinchers clicked and snapped as it climbed up the drapes. "Oh, children, it's just a spider," Granny Rhoda said as she crossed the room and picked the creepy crawly thing up with her bare hands. Daphne squealed as if she had been the one to touch it, and crawled under her blanket to hide. "Just a spider?" Sabrina cried. "You could put a saddle on that thing." "He's South American, I believe," Granny said, petting the spider like it was a kitten. "You're a long way from home, friend. How did you find your way here?" "Like you have to ask," Sabrina cried. Now, the old woman said. "It's just a harmless spider." Elvis trotted over and sniffed the creature. The tarantula raised up 2 legs and hissed at the Great Dane, causing the usually fearless hound to leap back and yelp in surprise. "Is it gone yet?" Daphne's muffled voice came from under the covers. "Has it been squished?" "Girls, Puck's just being a boy. Brothers do these kinds of things to their sisters all the time," Granny said soothingly. He's not our brother, Sabrina shouted as she crawled out of bed and stumped across the room toward the door. Where are you going? Granny Rhoda asked. Tell Puck's face what my fish thinks of him, the girl said, marching past the old woman and out the door. Don't leave him here with the spider, Daphne begged, but her sister ignored her plea. Puck was long overdue for a succulent nose, and Sabrina was just the person to give it to him. Puck, like Mr. Canis, was an ever after, a 4,000-year-old fairy in the body of an 11-year-old boy. Rude, selfish, smelly, and obnoxious, the boy had been taunting Sabrina since he had met her. He dumped a bucket of paint on her, rubbed her toothbrush in red pepper seeds, filled her pockets with bloodworms, and put something in her shoes that still made her shudder when she recalled the smell. Puck also had a slew of magical pranks. He could shapeshift into any animal and several inanimate objects. Sabrina couldn't count how many times he had morphed into a chair and then pulled himself out from under her when she sat down. Why? What Granny Rhoda had taken to him was beyond comprehension, especially with his well-documented history. Everyone from William Shakespeare to Rudyard Kipling had warned about Puck's exploits, yet Granny treated him as if he were one of the families and had even invited him to live with the Grimms. Now Sabrina was determined to make the trip to the king, which she had declined the invitation. She marched down the hall to his bedroom. No one had been in Puck's room since it had been built. Glinda, the good witch, and the three little pigs used nails, hammers, and magic to create it, and was finished the rude boy hadn't bothered to invite anyone in to see the final result. So, when Sabrina opened the door and stepped inside, she was amazed by what she found. Puck's room was impossible. There were trees and grass, and a stone path and a waterfall that spilled into a lagoon. There was an actual sky with clouds and kites where the ceiling should have been. In the center of a clearing was a wrestling ring, in which a kangaroo wearing boxing gloves and shorts sat lazily waiting for his next challenger. A roller coaster sailed on a track above Sabrina, and an ice-cream truck sat off to one side. In the center of it all was Puck, perched on an enormous throne, wearing his stupid golden crown. He was eating an ice cream cone that held half a dozen different-colored, different-flavored scoops, all of which were dripping down his arm. Poor Sabrina was so astonished by her surroundings that she failed to notice the metal plate at her feet. When she stepped onto it, she triggered the release of an egg, which rolled down a narrow track and fell onto a nasty rail that cracked its shell in half. The egg then emptied its drippings onto a skillet, which triggered the striking of a match that ignited a gas burner. Soon the egg was popping and crackling as the heat from the flame cooked it, causing steam to rise, which, in turn, filled a balloon that rose into the air. The balloon was connected by a string to a small lever that tipped a bucket of water into a drinking glass sitting on the high end of a seesaw. The seesaw tilted downward from the weight, untying a rope that held a heavy sandbag. The sandbag fell to the ground and hit a bright red button, and then it all came to a stop. And, unfortunately, that's when Sabrina noticed the bizarre contraption. What the? She said aloud. But just then a buzzer drowned out her voice, and the girl was catapulted off the metal plate and up through the air, and then down into a large vat of goo, causing an enormous splash. Doesn't anyone knock around here? Puck complained, when Sabrina finally fought her way to the surface. What is this stuff? She cried, as she struggled through a vat of thick white mush in which several dog chunks floated. The stink of it nearly made Sabrina barf. It's a big tub of glue and buttermilk, of course, the boy said, as if it were obvious, with some bread and butter pickles added for flavor. It's quite stinky. You're going to pay for this, Puck! Sabrina screamed as she climbed out of the tub. She wiped her face as well as she could and flared her nostrils. There she is, Miss America, the prankster said. He tossed his huge ice cream cone into the wrestling ring, and the boxing kangaroo lapped it up happily. Then the boy jumped into the air, and two massive pink-streaked insect wings sprang from his back. Soon he was soaring high above Sabrina. Just like an ever after they used magic to run from a fight. Come down here, you smelly little freak, Sabrina shouted. With our fists, Puck cried indignantly. Human, I'm royalty. A prince fights like a prince. His wings flapped loudly as he flew across his forest room to a nearby table. He scooped up 2 swords and flew back to Sabrina, tossing one at her feet as he floated effortlessly to the ground. The girl grabbed her weapon and held it confidently. It was made of wood, like Puck's, but it was still hot if she got a good whack at him. The 2 children stuck with each other. Sabrina wasted no time thrusting her sword at the boy, who immediately floated several feet off the ground and spun easily, dodging her attack. While she was off balance, Puck flew toward her, trying to strike her arm, but Sabrina shifted her way, swung her sword, and hit him on the top of his head. "Dirty little snot-face," the boy cried as he rubbed his sore noggin. "Someone's been learning." "Charge me again, you'll see what else I've learned," horse breath, Sabrina threatened. Puck flew at her, swinging the wooden sword toward her shoulder, only to have it blocked by Sabrina's sword. She took a swipe at his belly, missing him by less than an inch. "Tisk, tisk, looks like you haven't learned the most important lesson of all," he laughed. "Always protect your butt." Puck spun around and smacked Sabrina on the backside with a sword. The blow felt like the sting of a dozen honeybees, but Sabrina would never give him the satisfaction of hearing her cry out in pain. "You're as slow as you are ugly," the boy taunted. "You miserable little stink pig," Sabrina screamed, wildly slashing at him. He easily dodged each attack, leaping and flying out of the way, even flipping over her head. When he landed, he jammed his sword into her back and chuckled. "Too bad you're dead," he said. "You've got to get a hold of that temper. It beats you every time." Sabrina tossed the sword down angrily and spun around on him with her fists clenched. Seeing that she meant to knock his head off, Puck did what anybody would do when facing an angry Sabrina Grimm. He ran. She chased him around the lagoon, threw some heavy brush out the other side, and right into Granny Rhoda. The old woman stood over them, and her expression, or what they could see of it behind her beauty mask, was disapproving. The mask seemed to make a big impression on Puck. "Old lady," he cried. He always called Granny Rhoda by that name. "Your face! You've been cast by a hobgoblin." "Lieblings, that's enough of this nonsense," Granny said as the dirty boy scampered to his feet and hid behind her. "First of all, in my defense, the chainsaw was propped on the door, and I was only supposed to scare her," he said. "If someone got hurt, it wasn't my fault." "Puck, we are talking about the spider," Granny Rhoda said. "Oh, the spider. How did it go off? Were they scared out of their wits?" he asked. "Which one of them went to bed?" "I know you didn't mean any harm," the old woman said, "but girls do have school today, and it would have been nice to have a quiet, chaos-free morning for once." Puck looked in her face as if she was speaking another language, and what would be the fun of that? "Let's back up," Sabrina demanded. "What chainsaw?" Granny ignored the question and took the boy's hand. She placed the tarantula into it and smiled kindly. "Let's put this somewhere safe." Puck took the spider and rubbed its furry back softly. "It's okay, little guy. Did the big ugly girl scare you?" "I know, she's gruesome, but you're safe now." Sabrina growled. "What's going on here?" Daphne said from the doorway. The little girl rubbed the sleep out of her eyes and then looked around. "Holy cow!" "Daphne, move off the plate you're standing on," her sister roared, but the little girl just gawked at Puck's room. "You've got an ice cream truck!" she cried as the roller coaster whipped along its track above her. "And a roller coaster!" "Daphne, listen to me!" Sabrina shouted, but the egg was already cooking. The balloon was already floating upward. "Sabrina, why do you look like a booger?" the little girl asked as the seesaw fell. The alarm sounded and, just as it had done to Sabrina, the catapult fired Daphne into the air and sent her flailing into the vat of goo. When she landed, she tried to stand up and wiped